Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. You're watching All 24 News special coverage on the Russia-Ukraine file. I am Karim Fez Zachary, your host. Here's what's happening today. The war in Ukraine could last for years, affirmed the head of Nato, calling for steadfast support from Ukraine's allies as Russian forces battle for territory in the country's east. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said supplying state-of-the-art weaponry to Ukrainian troops would boost the chance of freeing its eastern region of Donbass from Russian control. According to Ukrainian officials, Russia has amassed forces near Severodonetsk in an attempt to seize Ukraine's last urban foothold in the east, but made little progress. EU's list of sanctions has not made any impact yet on Moscow, while the backfiring effect on the West is apparent. And to delve more into the topic, I am joined live via Skype by Dr. Ekaterina Matoy, intelligence and security analyst from Switzerland, along with Dr. Attila Demeko, head of the Center for Geopolitics at MCC, joining us from Budapest. Thank you, doctors, for joining us. We commence right after this break. So let me share with you the updates before we delve into discussion. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made a visit to the eastern and southern regions of the country, Mykolaiv and Odessa. This comes at a time when NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and UK Prime Minister are warning that the war in Ukraine can take long. Let's follow the report and we get back.
As the war in Ukraine is heading to its sixth month, with Russian military forces intensifying their offensive operations to tighten their grip, mainly on the eastern and southern regions of Ukraine, Ukraine's leaders thanking the regional services and military forces for their resistance against the Russian heavy military weight thrown on the country as part of their strategic advancement towards Kyiv.
I thank each and every one of you for the great work, for the great service, for what you do protecting our country, each of us, our families.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made a visit to the town of Mykolaiv in southern Ukraine. For the first time, Zelensky inspected a badly damaged residential building and held meetings with local officials, as he also inspected the National Guard base in Odessa after Russia had intensified offensive operations.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to see you, support you, and thank you for the hard, heroic, important work, your service to our country and each one of us.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg have warned Western allies to prepare for a long haul in Ukraine as Russian forces intensify their assault.
Important to go to Ukraine at a particularly critical time. The worry that we have is that a bit of Ukraine fatigue is starting to set in around the world. But when you got to understand, the Ukrainians are suffering terribly in the east of their country. Putin is continuing to commit appalling atrocities. The Russians are grinding forward inch by inch.
The Russian army said on Friday that just under 7,000 foreign mercenaries from 64 countries had arrived to Ukraine since the start of the conflict, and that 2,000 of them have been killed.
Since the start of the special military operation, 6,956 people have arrived in Ukraine. 1,956 have already been eliminated, and 1,779 have left. As of June 17, 2022, there were mercenaries and weapons specialists for 64 countries in our lists.
The tide of the war in Ukraine is taking wide mediatic space as all European leaders support Ukraine and help this country, which is a step away from devastation due to fatigue and lack of heavy weaponry.
So let me commence with you, Dr. Attila Demko. It seems that the war is tipping to Moscow's favor, or in Moscow's favor, and we see that perhaps the heavy weaponry and heavy weapons that Ukraine was asking for is being stalled. It's not being delivered. Why do you think is that? And do you think that this perhaps the training that UK is going to provide for Ukrainian soldiers is going to cut it?
So I think Ukraine is getting weapons from the West, but it's not enough. First of all, there are not enough weapons in Western countries. So what is Ukraine asking for is not there in many cases. And sometimes it's there, but it's being used. For example, the US military has plenty of tanks and plenty of artillery, but they are in service. So they are not giving it to Ukraine. That's one point. The second point is that Russians changed tactics. So what they are doing is they are attacking with artillery, big artillery barrages. And it's very hard to counter it without a similar level of artillery. So Ukraine is in a difficult situation. Russia is getting ahead, but very, very slowly. So it's a long war, as the NATO Secretary General said. It's going to be very long, but Russia is slowly but surely winning this war. And it's very hard to turn the tide for one more reason. It's the economic reason that Europe is dependent on Russian gas and up to a degree on Russian oil. And it cannot be replaced. So Algeria can play a role with gas, but unfortunately Europe needs a lot of energy, and much of this energy is coming from the Russian Federation.
Dr. Ekaterina Matoy, what is your reading concerning the developments on the ground? We see that the European Union and all the Western countries are trying to show a image of solidarity, but in reality there are a lot of countries and let's say their citizens who are pointing to domestic problems and complaining about the substantial amount of aid being sent to Ukraine.
Well, we can interpret this from at least 2 points of view. On the one hand, it's the narrative of those powers that are behind Ukraine. And look, they need help, they need funding, they need weapons. Still, they don't get enough on behalf of the European Union. This is one perspective. Then we have another perspective which is talking about really need of Ukraine of those funds, and they really need actually to be supported to protect their country. Anyway, you cannot overlook the presence of foreign advisors, of foreign countries that are behind Ukraine and that are there in Ukraine. This is why it's very difficult. We are talking about a lot of fog when it's about all of these narratives that we find in the public space.
Do you think that Ukraine perhaps is ill-advised when it comes to this war? Because we see that they run out of all their ammunition and they are keeping asking for heavy weaponry to be delivered to them. And we see the West being reluctant, the US is being reluctant, and they are saying perhaps these heavy weaponry and this cutting-edge technology could fall in the wrong hands. That's one excuse that they have been pointing to. And perhaps the logistics, it could pose a big problem for these weaponry to be delivered if they are delivered, if they are not targeted directly by Russian attacks. So how can you explain this altogether?
Well, the problem is let's go back. Why do we have war in Ukraine? Do really Ukraine actually is looking for peace? Then we can get the answer you are looking for actually to the question, to your question. Why? Because it seems that in the case of Ukraine, some powers are looking and are waiting that Ukraine to be in its knees because it needs reconstruction. Ukraine, there is an entire, scenario behind what's happening in Ukraine. On the other hand, this is also a complex question because we have, on the one hand, we have the Russian Federation, which is an arms exporter and can sustain at least on middle term an increased throughput of ammunition. On the other hand, Ukraine, as most or many countries on this planet, doesn't have a similarly developed military complex and is purchasing either or credit or with funds. Any case, it's expensive. So this is why somehow it's very difficult because also it's about these sensitive issues, about NATO. How much can you push? How much they can push Zelensky and its country against actually Russia.
And without actually provoking Russia, I see. Dr. Attila Demko, given the support that Ukraine has received from nations around the world, is there any other possibility they can achieve an independent nation of their own without losing more territory?
I think the heroic defense what Ukraine achieved in the first few months ensure that Ukraine will be an independent nation. So I think what they did in Kiev and the defense of Mykolaiv and the defense of Donbass really caused a lot of harm to the Russian military. Russia lost a lot. So I don't think that the independence of Ukraine is in danger anymore. It was in danger at the beginning of the war, or it may have been in danger. We don't know what the Russian plan was really. But without losing more territory, I am not sure about that. So the question is if Ukraine, even if Ukraine gets all the weapons it asks for, so for example, 500 tanks, 1,000 artillery pieces, 3,000 multiple rocket launchers. Even if Ukraine gets this, Russia can still mobilize and can put millions on the front line. So the question is, anybody will fight with Ukraine against the nuclear power, a superpower, nuclear superpower, and that's I don't think even Poland would do, which is the most supportive of Ukraine in Europe or the United Kingdom or the United States. So without losing more land, to be very realistic, I think there will be a frozen line somewhere in the future. And this frozen line will mean that Ukraine will lose more land compared to the February the 24th line. So I think in that sense, Russian aggression will not achieve all its aims, but will achieve some of its aims. This is realistic. This is realism.
But are the aims of Russia clear? Do you find the objectives of Russia clear?
Changing, compared to the original aim, which was basically a quick defeat of Ukraine in a few weeks and replacing the government. I think realistically they cannot do this. I don't think Russia is able to do this, and I think they know it. But to capture Donbass and capture Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast, I think it's possible for Russia to do this. So they have changed what victory is. For Ukraine, already keeping part of Donbass in Ukrainian hands, that would be a victory. So I think that's the most Ukraine can hope for now. Otherwise, to destroy the Russian military, Ukraine alone is not strong enough. Russia is 3.5 times bigger, and as my colleague said, Russia has a full defense industry. It can make as much ammunition as it wants, while Ukraine doesn't have enough ammunition for artillery. And the West cannot provide everything. We don't have factories, not enough factories. The Americans may have, but you have logistical problems. So it's not an easy situation. That it's not only that the West is not willing to give. It's quite a lot what Ukraine needs, an awful lot what Ukraine needs to stop Russia, because Russia is not doing very well on the front lines, but it has a lot of weapons and a lot of people if mobilization happens.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed to defend the country's south in an address recorded on his way back from a visit to the regions of Mykolaiv and Odessa along the Black Sea. While this visit to the city of Mykolaiv in the country's south, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky assured that his soldiers were keeping their morale up and were confident in their triumph over Russian forces.
I came back from the south. Today I visit our advanced positions in the Mykolaiv region. I visited Mykolaiv and also the Odessa region. I spoke to our defenders, the military, the police, the National Guards, the territorial defense. They are confident, and it's obvious that they don't doubt our victory.
Back to you, Dr. Attila Demko. Russian forces reached the outskirts of Mykolaiv in early March, but were driven back. Is Ukraine on the edge of giving up here? How does the West see Russian advancement in the territory?
No, in Mykolaiv, the defense of Mykolaiv was one of the victories of Ukraine at the early stages of the war. When Kherson fell, there was a danger. Kherson and Mykolaiv are very close. Mykolaiv is a bigger city. It's close to 1 million, so it's a big city. It's a very important city, for example, for shipbuilding. and Russia would like to have it, I'm pretty sure. But I don't think that Mykolaiv is in immediate danger. Now, Russians are on the defense on the Kherson front line, and I think they want first to defeat Ukraine in the Donbass, and they are doing it very slowly. So Mykolaiv is not in an immediate danger. I see that Russia would like to have the city for strategic reasons, and also because this is the door to Odessa and the door to Transnistria, which are two important targets for Russia. But I don't think Russia on the short term is capable to take Mykolaiv. No, I don't think it can happen in the next few months.
Yes, Dr. Ekaterina Matoy, according to the Ukrainian military, on the battlefields, the industrial city of Severodonetsk was under heavy artillery and rocket fire as the Russian forces attacked areas outside the city. How important are these regions for Russia, and why is Severodonetsk a prime target in Moscow's war, according to you?
Well, Severodonetsk may allow Russian Federation the possibility to claim independence of the Donbas region as an achieved goal, while its strategic importance does not match of that of Crimea, for example, Mariupol, and eventually Mykolaiv, or of course and Odessa. In case of large-scale conflict, Severodonetsk, it may allow Russian Federation to stabilize somehow internal politics. On the other hand, I do not agree with this point of view. I mean, with this statement that Severodonetsk is of critical importance for Russia. Why? Because in the end, if you have an holistic approach towards what's happening in Ukraine, somehow, to me at least, of course, a subjective opinion, I consider that what matters in the end is what those parties that are involved in this conflict are waiting, and it's very important the point where they want to reach. Mm-hmm. Either it's Russia or the so-called West, which is behind Ukraine, please.
So here you're raising another question as to why this war is still grinding on. Why is it still continuing while the West are ignoring, let's say, Russia's interest and Russia's concerns here? Perhaps Dr. Dmytro can tell us more about that.
So I think the West mishandled Russia before 2014 because of the 2008 Bucharest summit. That was not the wisest course of action to open the door, even if on the long term, to Ukraine and Georgia, without giving them proper defense against Russia. So we promised something, the collective West promised something to Ukraine and to Georgia, which it couldn't keep. So that was a problem. But after 2014, maybe there should have been more advice to Ukraine to agree on the Minsk II agreements, but now the West cannot do much. I mean, Russia is an aggressor country, so there must be a pushback to Russia. But it's very hard to balance between pushing back to Russia and make Russia to pay and to destroy Ukraine, because Ukraine is being destroyed every day with this war, and also to achieve a peace, or not even a peace, but a ceasefire, which is not totally disastrous for Ukraine. So it's an extremely hard task to also show Russia that it's unacceptable what it did. Also to understand a bit Russia why it did. It's very hard even to say it now, looking at this aggression. But unfortunately, we have to take into consideration the Russian views also, because it's a power which we cannot defeat. It's impossible. So I think it's a very, very delicate task.
Is it really impossible to defeat, or perhaps the approach that the West have taken was wrong, or perhaps not as effective, which is mainly they were basing on sanctions? How ineffective were the sanctions, or the sanctions proved to be?
If I may say that militarily Russia is not doing well, that's true. Mm-hmm. And if the Western countries would send not only arms but soldiers, especially the Americans, conventionally Russia could be defeated. But Russia is a nuclear power, superpower. So how you defeat a nuclear superpower without risking nuclear war? That's the issue.
Exactly,
Economic.
that's the core issue, and that's the core threat, which actually can question or let's say explain the reason why everybody is going through an arms race trying to get more nuclear weapons. According to you, how do you think the global order, law and order, is going to be when we see more and more countries trying to get more nuclear weapons here?
Well, we will be in a more dangerous world. It's already a very dangerous world, and it's going to be even worse with famine in Africa, with insecurity in Europe. Our countries already feel it. Maybe not so much Switzerland, but in our region, there are problems with fuel in many countries. The prices are very high. Even for Europe, it's a very tough situation. So that's why I say it's a very hard road to go down. Sanctions also hurt Europe a lot. And in Hungary, our position is very clear that if we sanction gas, natural gas, we will hurt ourselves much more, the whole of Europe, not only Hungary, than we hurt Russia. That's reality, and we have to face realities that it's not a movie where the good wins over the bad. It's not something we can achieve easily. It's going to be a very long conflict with Russia.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Ekaterina Matoy, according to you, why would some countries try to get more nuclear weapons, perhaps to prove themselves and prove their presence in the world, seeing the West is being more or less hypocritical in dealing with certain issues, and we see that they are not really objective, putting their interests first?
Well, I consider that becoming a nuclear power, it's rather like I am achieving a safety card in my pocket, rather a weapon that I intend to use it in a certain point in time. No, it's rather a kind of it has to do with the need to assure that the state has its own safety card for a potential situation. I don't think it has to do with nuclear power. Owning nuclear power doesn't supposed to mean that I'm a very powerful country. Let's have a look at Pakistan, for example. Mm-hmm. Pakistan is a nuclear power, but still it has so many problems, internal issues, mm-hmm. security issues, societal issues, not to mention many other things. So yes, nuclear power, becoming a nuclear power is rather, like I said, it's a safety card, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Moving on now, European Commission President said that Georgia has a strong EU membership application, but had to come together politically and addressing certain priorities, leaving the Black Sea nation heartbroken. Meanwhile, the Commission proposed making Moldova an EU membership candidate.
Georgia shares the same aspirations and potential as Ukraine and Moldova. Its application has strength, in particular, the market orientation of its economy with a strong private sector. To succeed, the country must now come together politically to design a clear path towards structural reform and the European Union, a path that concretely sets out the necessary reforms, brings on board civil society, and benefits from broad political support. This is why we recommend to Council to grant the European perspective and to come back and assess how Georgia meets the number of conditions before granting its candidate status.
Back to you, Dr. Attila Demko. How difficult do you think is it for Ukraine to join the EU amidst all these other members who are trying to get in? And how is this membership going to affect the Russian advancement in any way? And don't you think that by having Ukraine join the bloc, the EU is going to pay a heavy economic price rebuilding the country?
So I personally very much support the joining of Ukraine to EU because it's a European country and it deserves EU membership. But in reality, on the short term, membership is not very probable because there is a war in Ukraine. There will be, even after the war, there will be a frozen conflict in Ukraine. And Ukraine is a country of almost 40 million. Even the non-occupied territories, it's 35, 36 million now. And a poor country with a lot of problems. So it's very hard to imagine that Europe can take Ukraine in a short term without very, very big problems for the European Union. And it's also the same for Georgia. Two territories of Georgia are occupied by Russia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Georgia is, of course, it's much smaller, and Moldova is even smaller with less than 3 million people. But even Moldova has a territory occupied by Russian troops called Transnistria. So all these, statements are good. But in reality, all three countries, but especially Ukraine, has a very big problem of joining European Union very fast. I think there is not enough money in the European Union to rebuild Ukraine. European Union has deep problems, deep inside problems, economic problems.
But why insisting on letting Ukraine join the bloc? Is it just something symbolic? Because in reality, we see that Ukraine does not really meet the Copenhagen criteria.
Yes, I think it's a promise to encourage Ukrainians, to help them in their moment of need. But in reality, there is no swift way for Ukraine to join. I wish there would be. So of course, they deserve to become members of European Union. But the word is not about what you deserve, but what is reality. And reality is that Ukraine cannot be in the short term or even in a decade member of the European Union. And I think more or less the same is true for Georgia. And Moldova is in a bit better situation, but still the Russians are there. And there are many hurdles to jump for Moldova. These are all very poor countries compared to the average European. Ukraine is 1/4 or even less now of per capita GDP, and Moldova is very similar, and Georgia is not much better.
What about you, Dr. Ekaterina Matoy? What benefit is there for Ukraine to join the EU according to you?
Well, I think the same benefits that we, the European Union citizen, we received and we use on a daily basis, at least until the somehow pandemic. Before the pandemic, I'm thinking about the right to travel without any without thinking about borders and controls and so on and so forth. I'm thinking, but still, I want to go back to your question to my colleague. Although I really support everything what he said, I see this European Union accession, actually, it is used as an instrument during this period.
Although the bloc is mainly an economic bloc and it's not really political nor military, I don't see the reason why are the Western countries insisting on letting, let's say, Ukraine join. Besides, economic sanctions are increasingly being used to promote the full range of American foreign policy and the West's objectives. Yet, all too often, sanctions turn out to be little more than expressions of US and West preferences that hurt their own interest, economic interest, without changing the target's behavior for the better. Do you think that that is a rule? Sanctions need to be less unilateral and more focused on the problem at hand. The West need to institute far more rigorous oversight of sanctions, both prior to adopting them and regularly thereafter. What do you think?
As I saw for the last few months, and not only, of course, I'm pretty sure that most of my colleagues are very much aware of this, the European Union has been very much hit by these sanctions, by the effect of these sanctions, rather than Russians. That's the problem on the one hand. On the other hand, as it is, we can see also in the case of Iran, what sanctions actually means these days. Do they really have the effect that was looking for when they have been used against a state or another?
So mainly, Dr. Attila Dimko, the expected benefits outweigh likely the costs, and that sanctions accomplish more than alternative foreign policy tools. How far was Putin's statements when he was at the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg true concerning the sanctions at hand?
I think the sanctions, the oil and energy sanctions, hurt Europe more on the short and medium term than Russia. So if Russia stops delivering gas and they cut it into half to Germany and Italy, Europe will have very big problems by January, while Russians will still sit in their warm rooms and they can drive their cars, and we will have rationing in Europe. That's reality. The problem with Western Europe that there is so much ideology when we talk about sanctions, when we talk about Ukrainian EU membership. Nobody dares to tell the truth in Europe that we are not helping Ukraine with the sanctions at all. At least with the oil and gas sanctions, no. The technological sanctions are good. The sanctions on the oligarchs and Putin's circle are good. But the energy sanctions actually doesn't help Ukraine. It hurts Europe more than it hurts Russia. And Russia is selling now gas to China, oil to India, China, coal to India, much more than before. But again, everybody is afraid of Europe, of telling the truth. Actually, there is one country, Hungary, we are saying the truth. The truth is that we cannot hurt Russia on the medium term more than Russia can hurt us in energy. Unfortunately, it's an ideological word, and nobody dares to say that because you will be accused of pushing Russian agenda.
Point clear, Dr. Attila Demke. Thank you so much. We have reached the end of our special coverage. Thank you, dear guests, for your thorough analysis, and thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News with me, Karim Fazakari. Bye for now.